So to kick off the top 10, we're starting with this HPI, or Hobby Products International 1997 McLaren F1 GTR, and this is the long tail version. I've tried to keep the manufacturers varied in my top 10 list, and I've tried to keep away from recency bias as well, although that always creeps in a little bit. For anyone who's not aware, HPI produced high quality models. Their earlier models were die cast, and then the later models were made from resin. They haven't produced models for a while, but when they were very much at the upper echelon of quality. This particular model actually represents the first long-tail GTR McLaren to actually win a race, which was the debut of the 1997 British GT Championship. This one's run by Parabolica Motorsport in this livery, although it changed liveries throughout its lifetime. When you're getting on for 1,000 models, it really is difficult to choose a top 10, and it can change from time to time, but you've got to go with your feelings when you make the video. For me, the F1 GTR, particularly in the long tail version, it's just a beastly looking car, particularly on this one with the big wing at the back. This will be the higher downforce version that they would have run on most circuits outside of the likes of Le Mans, and HPI have really captured the detail of this very well. You can really see it down to all of the little details that you'd like to see on there, like the tow hooks, the individual details in the lights, and even physical badges on the rear. Overall, just a very well put together model, and hopefully you can see that from the video footage. Moving on to number 9 on the list, and here I'm going with this 1968 version of the Chaparral 2G. This is a TSM model, short for True Scale Miniatures, of the car driven by Jim Hall in the 1968 Can-Am series. This one's actually a development of the probably more well-known and more popular Chaparral 2E, which is one of the Chaparrals I don't have in my collection. I've actually got the 2D, the 2F and the 2H alongside this model. The 2G could be described as a development of a development, so by 1968 it wasn't really very competitive, and by all accounts it was Jim Hall's driving that kept it close to the field. It had good power, but the chassis just wasn't there at the time. Whilst the real world car didn't exactly see lots of success, I think it's pretty clear that the TSM model is a definite success. Like all main brand TSM models, this one is made from resin, with excellent finish and some nice panel details as well down to the rivets. It's also nice to see a good amount of detail in the back. I always like the parts where it's exposed at the rear and you can see the engine, exhaust, all of that sort of stuff. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this one, and it's a great addition to my collection. Hot on the heels at number 8, we've got the 1997 Saleen Mustang GT2. This version, the version that raced at Le Mans in 1997. This one is a Provence Moulage kit, very similar to Starter. A lot of those kits are created along the same lines. And I was really happy to pick this one up. It came in a group of model kit cars. These were all pre-built before I got them. Whenever it comes to kit cars, you're always relying on the ability and attention to detail of the model maker. This one's not perfect, but it's been done pretty well overall, and I'm quite happy with it. I believe these are pretty rare, and I've been looking for one of these for a while, so I was very happy to be able to pick one up to add to my collection. The nostalgia for this one for me actually is in relation to games I used to play when I was growing up. One of the things I try to do looking back on those older games is to collect the cars that were my favourite in them, and this one was in a few games in different guises. These kits might be old now, but they're pretty well detailed in general, and this one sits really nicely on my display shelf alongside my other factory built models. And for me, it's a proud part of my 90s Le Mans and GT cars collection. And now from a couple of slices of old American pie to a classic British bruiser at number 7. This is the Rover SD1, the Bastos version from the 1986 European Touring Car Championship. And this model is produced by Neo Scale Models, again another resin manufacturer and another high quality manufacturer. In terms of the areas they focus on, Neo Scale Models tend to do older cars, so most of mine from them are from the 70s and 80s, a lot of touring cars. I was far too young to really be watching racing when these cars were actually on the circuits, but looking back at older season reviews and just seeing them around at classic car shows, not in racing form but in their road car form, I've always really enjoyed the Rover SD ones. They're also often a feature at the Goodwood Revival as well, which has some of the best classic touring car racing that you'll find. And to me, the Bastos livery is probably my favourite of all the liveries of the cars. The Bastos livery suits many cars as well. This one was the TWR car that ran in 1986. Under 1985 rules, Wyn Percy, the main driver, would have actually won the championship that year, but due to rule changes for 1986, he lost out on the championship to the BMWs at the time. And it's an awesome car, sounds awesome, drives awesome, looks awesome. Really happy to have it amongst the rest of my models. We're sticking over my side of the pond, and screaming in at number 6 we have the V12 Lister Storm GTL. This is the 1997 version, which was the first version to use this new aero in an attempt to keep up with the other GT1 cars of the time, like the Porsche 911 GT1 and the Mercedes CLK GTR that were just running away with everything. This is one of the older resin models made by Spark, and it represents the car that ran in the 1997 Le Mans, and this one was driven by, amongst other people, Jeff Lees and the man, the myth, the legend himself, Tiffany Dell. This is another one of the cars that appeared in one of my favourite racing games when I was growing up, and there's a little bit of a story to this one as well, which is one of the reasons why it's in my top 10. I had wanted one of these for a while, so when I saw one at a slightly lower price on eBay, I jumped on it, but it was badly advertised, and I didn't realise at the time that it was not in particularly great condition. Following this, I got in contact with a guy from Germany on one of the model forums I'm on, and he took the car on as a job to repair it and bring it back up to as close as possible to original condition, and did a pretty good job on it. So I'm happy now to have this one in its better state to display alongside all my other GT1 cars. In at number 5 we have our second and final Spark model, and this is the 1999 Mercedes CLR, also known as the Flying Mercedes. This particular car is the number 4 car that actually didn't start the race. It's the car that flipped twice, driven by Mark Webber amongst others. It did its little mid-air pirouette during both practice and qualifying, whilst the number 5 car with the blue mirrors, driven by Peter Dumbreck, was the more famous car for flipping during the race and catching all the television coverage. It's a decent quality model like all of the Spark ones, even the earlier ones, although with the CLR they decided to release it without any decals on it. There never was a road version of this, so it's just the race car in plain livery. I added the decals to this myself. The original model would have come with them, but when I purchased it, the guy who owned it did not have the decals, so I had to purchase them separately, and they're not Spark decals. This one was key for me because it was one of the last remaining 1999 Le Mans cars, the main prototypes from that year that I didn't have. It's a little bit rarer and a little bit special, so that's why it sits in my top 10. So next up at number 4 we have an Italian Stallion, and this one is a little bit different as this is a Code 3 conversion. For anyone not familiar with the term, a Code 3 conversion, also sometimes called a Code 4 conversion, is taking an existing model and turning it into something new. In this case, the model started life as an Altair standard road model Ferrari F40, so a relatively cheap model, and I've turned it into one of the 2 Team Tizen Star Card F40s that ran in the 1994 Japan All GT Championship. That involved, of course, adding some black paint to the bonnet and roof and adding the various decals all around the body of the car. It also needed a tow hook on the front, a rear diffuser being added, a change to the rear spoiler to turn it into the F40 LM style spoiler, and it needed a new set of wheels as well, in this case which I picked from an Altair version of the Ferrari F333 SP, which is a Le Mans prototype. Similar versions of these cars are actually made by Ebro, but they're quite rare and expensive, so I'm quite happy to have this one now in my collection that I've put some work into myself. It's always nice to own models that you've worked on. So through the rarity and the time invested in the model, it sits squarely in the top 10 at number 4. So as we now hit what would be the podium positions, we have, to my mind at least, what are some really fantastic old school racing cars. And we're kicking off at number 3 with this IMSA GTO Mazda RX-7 from the guys over at TSM. I really quite like the crazy sort of wide body silhouette cars that you had in the 80s and 90s. I was more familiar with the Group 5 cars, which we'll get onto, but I later became aware of the IMSA GTO series and the wide body cars they had in that. And one of the best from that was this Mazda. This is the 1990 version that raced at Mid-Ohio. It has more of a ducktail rather than the wing of the later versions, and it also doesn't have the slits in the front bumper for cooling. They came later. I'm just a big fan of this because the body kit on it is pretty immense. It's got the wide flared arches, massive huge wheels, huge tyres on the back. It's just over the top from every angle, and because of that it's extremely striking. It's worth noting as well that this car had the first version of the 4-rotor engine that would later go on to power the Mazda 787B, made famous for its 1991 win at Le Mans due to its reliability against much faster machines at the time. This car isn't as well known as the 787B, but personally I easily prefer it over the Group C car from Mazda. It's just nuts in the best way possible, and for me that's why it comes in at number 3. And moving from one crazy wide body car to a potentially even crazier wide body car, this one comes from Ebro and it's a representation of the 1980s Nissan Silvia Super Silhouette car. This is a Group 5 class car, and of all the models in this list, it's the most recent purchase that I've made. There was always going to be a Group 5 car in my list somewhere, and this was the one I chose just because of the look of the car, really. The Group 5 special production cars rules of the 1970s through to the early 80s were really quite relaxed and allowed some ludicrous tubular framed cars to be produced by the teams. Super low splitters, giant rear wings and huge boxy wide arches were typically the order of the day, and this Silvia exemplifies that. I enjoy the simple but effective livery as well, with the yellow lightning strike down each side. That's a nice touch. This particular car as well, like many of the Group 5 silhouette cars, had a massive turbocharger on there, so creates some crazy sounds when it's going, and that was one of the big features of the Group 5 special production era as well, the crazy noises that you would hear on the tracks from these cars with their massive turbos to the American cars with their giant rumbling V8s, sometimes up to nearly 9 litres in cases. There was always going to be a Group 5 car in my list, and this is the one, the runner-up. And now we finally reach the top spot, the cream of the crop, numero uno. This is a highly detailed representation of the 1990 Toyota 90C-V by Ignition model. Now, in honesty, this was not a particularly well-known or successful car, but that's not necessarily the point to me here. The Ignition model are one of the top-level brands in 143 scale models. They also do 118 as well. This is one of 5 Ignition model Group C cars that I have, and this one's my favourite. It's got great detail to it. The 90C-V took part in the Japanese Sports Car Championship, the World Sports Car Championship, and also ran at Le Mans. I'm not entirely sure, but I think this one represents the World Sports Car Championship entry, with one of the drivers being the late Roland Ratzenberger, who is most known for sadly crashing and losing his life on the same weekend as Ayrton Senna in 1994 at Imola. This one really makes it in at number 1 for a variety of reasons. Whilst I do enjoy Group 5 and the wide body cars, Group C is probably my favourite category of racing, with some absolutely amazing cars running through it over the years. I think outside of Japan as well, ignition models are pretty rare, so it's a bit of a prize to have one of these in my collection for me. And kind of regardless of whether the car itself is successful or not, the model is fantastic. Extremely intricate, and hopefully this video demonstrates that. But that brings us to the end of the top 10, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. This one's been a little different from the previous model videos I've done in the past, so hopefully that's a nice change, and I'll look to continue this sort of style in the future with the next upcoming videos, which will hopefully highlight a few more standout models from my collection. So hopefully you're looking forward to that, and I'll see you again next time.